And we will make America great again. And we will make America great again. And we will make America great again.
All right, here we go again. Donald Trump preaching the same old sermon he preached back in 2016, wanting to make America great again. Does he want to make America great like when he brazenly took bribes from fossil fuel companies to do anything they wanted, including removing all of our clean air and clean water regulations, and withdrawing us from the Paris Climate Treaty in order to lower his fossil fuel buddies' overhead costs to operate? Or great like when he profited off his presidency left and right by promoting his golf courses and hotels to foreign officials and traded national favors with China and Malaysia and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Qatar, to name a few? Which one of these actions made America great again? Seems like Trump's idea of making America great again translates into making his wallet size great again. But none of it should be surprising given that Trump has always been and always will be about himself and himself alone. And he's proved this time and time again. When he was president, no action came without a personal gain as its singular purpose. Everything he did was based on bribes he received. It was strictly bribe and ye shall get favors. He worked for the color of the money, not red, white, and blue, and the welfare of this country was up for grabs to the highest bidder. And in fact, other than catchphrases and tired juvenile cracks, Trump has no real political positions on any issue, at least none that can't be bought for the right price. Every position Trump takes was bought by his donors. Consider, first Trump was against China-owned TikTok, and now he's all in on TikTok because the company's CEO is pouring millions into his campaign. First Trump was against electric cars, and now he's all in on electric cars because Elon Musk is pouring millions into his campaign. First Trump was against crypto, and now he's all in on crypto because the owners are pouring millions into his campaign. And in fact, Trump's political positions are all bought and paid for by his contributors, and for the right price. This is part and parcel of Trump's mindset, and he has proved it time and time again. And this bribe-fueled platform was the exact template from which Trump ran the country during his presidency. Back then, Trump also preached that he wanted to get rid of job-killing regulations that he claimed were preventing our economy from growing, a claim whose real intent was masked behind Trump's deceptive terminology, calling our environmental regulations as job-killing regulations and removing the very laws put in place to save our lives from the toxins poisoning our air and drinking water. And on top of removing all of those life-saving environmental regulations, Trump also took the United States out of the Paris Climate Treaty as he had promised he would do to his fossil fuel buddies and gas and coal buddies who had paid him millions of dollars to do so, because the Paris Climate Treaty is grounded in phasing out the use of fossil fuels and in favor of moving towards clean energy. And Trump, bearing no hesitation to do what's best for himself, not best for the country, removed all our environmental regulations and got us out of the Paris Climate Treaty to pay back his donors. And in order to rally support for his wholesale butchering of all our clean air and clean water regulations, Trump, the consummate con artist that he is, sold the far-fetched idea to the public that our clean air and clean water regulations were unnecessary and had been enacted to stop climate change, and that climate change was not a real thing and was a hoax conjured up by the radical left. And to put stir into action, Trump hired one of Environmental Protection Agency's biggest enemies, a man by the name of Scott Pruitt, to head our Environmental Protection Agency. In contrast to all past presidents who had appointed scientists to head the Environmental Protection Agency, Trump appointed a man who knew nothing of science or the agency he was charged to head, other than believing that the agency's existence was completely unnecessary. Scott Pruitt, who had previously sued the Environmental Protection Agency 14 different times on behalf of his fossil fuel bosses, and whose singular mission in life was to destroy the Environmental Protection Agency, was now heading it, a move similar to having a terrorist head Homeland Security. And the nightmare didn't end there, because in running the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt actually used his fossil fuel bosses as his personal advisors in determining which environmental regulations to remove to make their business operations as cheap as possible. Scott Pruitt also took orders from Trump's other campaign donors, such as the gas and coal companies, who were directing Scott Pruitt as to which environmental regulations to remove next, based on which regulations hurt their profits the most. So in effect, Trump's Environmental Protection Agency was completely run by gas, oil, coal and fossil fuel companies that funded his campaign and was at their complete disposal in terms of policy and operation. And in a matter of days after Trump was elected, Trump managed to remove decades' worth of environmental regulations enacted to keep our air and drinking water clean and to keep cancer-causing toxins out of our air and water. Without a second thought, Trump put our healths and our futures at the mercy of profits generated by his fossil fuel and gas and coal allies. Regulations targeted at keeping out toxins such as methane and mercury and carbon and highly carcinogenic chemicals out of our air and water were now quietly removed by Trump. Trump also removed regulations blocking coal companies from dumping their waste into rivers and streams that contain our drinking water. Trump went a step further and committed an even greater crime against our healths by loosening our radiation regulations, claiming that radiation exposure, even equal to 5,000 chest X-rays, was safe for the public, now giving polluters the green light to dump radioactive material into our environment. You see, gas and oil waste are radioactive by nature and need to be disposed of in a biohazardously safe manner to avoid contaminating our environment, a procedure which is costly for gas and oil companies. So Trump's gas and oil donors bribed him to loosen our radiation regulations so that they won't have to spend so much money on the disposal of radioactive material, which is exactly what Trump did, again only thinking of his pocket at our expense. And Trump's unfettered attack on our environment didn't stop there. Having received $1 million from Dow Chemical Corporation, Trump lifted the ban on Dow insecticides, a ban previously placed during previous presidents' administrations, because Dow insecticides, which are highly carcinogenic and linked to cancers and brain damage, were being sprayed on our food crops. But Trump did not end his payback to Dow Chemicals there. Trump actually put the Dow Chemicals Legal Counsel in charge of our Superfund sites. These are sites where radioactive wastes are to be safely dumped. So Trump put our radioactive landfills, which affect the health of millions of Americans, into the hands of a compromised attorney who had previously defended the use of deadly insecticides and had denied the harms caused by these hazardous chemicals and had defended Dow Chemicals against a class action lawsuit for the deaths caused by their insecticides. Next, Trump lifted the ban on Roundup weed killer, which was the subject of another massive class action lawsuit for causing lymphoma and countless deaths. Next, Trump suspended the bans that the Environmental Protection Agency had been mandated to place on highly carcinogenic chemicals including methylene chloride, TCE, and NMP that are found in everyday household items such as toys which children are exposed to and which have already killed many people exposed to them. Trump allowed these chemicals to continue being used because his corporate friends were making millions in profit by using them. And these are only a few of the many examples of the crimes Trump committed against our health while president, all in the name of more profits. And in fact, from the moment Trump stepped into office, he declared a war on our health, putting his own profits and repaying campaign donors ahead of the welfare of Americans and denying the science confirming the danger, trying to brainwash the public that the science was a hoax. And to facilitate all these criminal actions against our health, Trump's EPA's appointee Scott Pruitt fired all of the Environmental Protection Agency scientists and shredded decades of records documenting the toxic effects of pollution on our air and water, and the climate change caused by the pollution emitted from fossil fuel and oil and coal companies. And by this act, Trump and Scott Pruitt committed the greatest and most comprehensive crime ever committed against our health. And Scott Pruitt was so conscious of the crimes he was committing against our environment and so paranoid of getting backlash for his brazen acts that he operated his job like a gangster, actually communicating with his fossil fuel bosses secretly and with different phones to assure his calls were not being wiretapped. Scott Pruitt actually spent $43,000 of our taxpayer money to build a soundproof phone booth for himself at the Environmental Protection Agency for that very purpose. He spent $70,000 more of our taxpayer money to buy bulletproof furniture for his office at the Environmental Protection Agency and to bulletproof his car. And he spent millions of our taxpayer dollars on round-the-clock bodyguards for himself because he knew the extent of his crimes against our environment were great enough to cause extreme public outcry and the potential for violent public outrage to endanger his personal safety. Now, what honest and forthright head of the Environmental Protection Agency has ever had to fear hitmen to implement such actions? Is this what Trump meant by making America great again? Who is a better caretaker of our future? The people who want to keep our air and water clean and look out for our health? or Trump who will sell out our future in a heartbeat if the price is right, giving big corporations the green light to do anything they wish to our environment as long as they pay him enough cash for it. Never mind that their toxins could cause cancer and other maladies. But as long as it's all in the name of profit, it has Trump's blessing. It's been estimated that in the aftermath of Trump's environmental assault and the removal of every one of our precious environmental regulations, that billions of tons of toxic pollutions were dumped into our air and water, despite Trump being told by our former EPA scientists that this could cause cancer and other maladies. And in fact, after hearing these warnings, Trump did not stop, but doubled down, and continued his attack on our environment, and has promised to do the same if he is re-elected. And so the lives that Trump was charged with protecting as the President of the United States were the pawns that he sacrificed willingly to increase his profits. Next on the bribe roster, Trump turned his attention to Saudi Arabia. It had been a policy of the United States not to share our nuclear secrets or our offensive weapons with Saudi Arabia because a majority of the 9/11 terrorists had been Saudi natives, and United States feared that Saudi Arabia could stage another attack on our country and use our own military weapons against us. That, along with Saudi Arabia's long history of human rights violations and the killing of thousands of innocent Yemeni civilians, had prompted the United States not to share with Saudi Arabia our nuclear technology and our offensive weapons. That all changed when Trump got into office in 2016. During Trump's 2016 campaign, Prince bin Salman of Saudi Arabia told Trump that he would give him a $2 billion bribe if he reversed our U.S. policy of not selling nuclear technology and offensive weapons to them. And with the dollar signs in his eyes and his own personal gain as his sole consideration, Trump swiftly agreed to do whatever the Saudis asked, not for a moment considering the interests of the United States. And once he became our president, Trump immediately reversed that U.S. policy and sold Saudi Arabia our nuclear technology and all the offensive weapons they needed. To justify this act, Trump told the public that the enemy of our enemy is our friend, and that Saudi Arabia, who was the enemy of Iran, was now our friend, and that is why he had decided to give Saudi Arabia what they wanted. A ridiculous alibi meant to cover up arming our ideological foe who, having a terroristic history against us and not being a NATO member, could easily use our very own weapons on us with an act of terrorism. And this is how Trump fooled our country into going along with his made-up alibi. And in return for selling these arms, Prince bin Salman made good on his promise and funneled $2 billion into Jared Kushner's Shelter Corporation, a corporation that Jared Kushner had just formed for this purpose alone, to be used as the conduit for this bribe in order to prevent any paper trail or any direct link of bribery to Trump himself. Quite a payday for Trump, who famously proclaimed that he's not becoming president for the money, and that he's actually losing money by becoming president. Not only was Trump profiting generously from his presidency, but doing so at the expense and detriment of America's national security. Trump made similar arrangements with the countries of United Arab Emirates and Qatar, to whom he sold arms against our policy. In exchange, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar funneled millions of dollars into Jared Kushner's newly formed Shelter Corporation. This Shelter Corporation that Jared Kushner formed was solely formed for the purpose of receiving this money from the three countries. And when the House Oversight Committee instituted an investigation into these shady practices by Jared Kushner, the investigation was quickly shut down by the House Republicans, headed by Jim Jordan, who opposed Jared Kushner being subpoenaed to the Congress to answer questions about these transactions. And this is the reason Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump quietly walked away from the White House during Trump's presidency, and later declared that they planned to stay out of a 2024 Trump presidential campaign and any future administration and have distanced themselves from further involvement in order to prevent any scenario where an investigation into their illegal bribe can be rekindled. But the bribes and corruption didn't end there. While he was president, Trump's acts of self-enrichment were frequent and came in many forms, and were always skillfully covered up so as not to look like bribes. For example, Trump sold favors to foreign officials by renting out his hotel rooms to them at extremely outrageous prices, such as $10,000 a night, with ridiculously overpriced gratuities such as $9,000 coffee breaks, which were astronomical prices, not charged to regular customers, but only to high-ranking foreign officials who were seeking favors for their governments. Some foreign officials would rent Trump hotel rooms for $10,000 a night, but not even stay at the rooms. The foreign officials seeking these favors were from countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, China, and Malaysia, and rented these hotel rooms all in exchange for foreign policy breaks by Trump to the detriment of our national security and to the benefit of enriching Trump personally. In one instance, foreign officials from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, for example, who were trying to lobby the Trump administration to support them during their blockade against their economic rival, Qatar. All they had to do was to rent some rooms at the Trump Hotel, pay Trump exorbitant hotel prices, and they got what they wanted. And when Trump's dictator buddy Erdogan told Trump to pull U.S. troops out of Syria, so Turkey could invade Syria without opposition, an act contrary to our foreign policy and our national security interests, Trump obeyed Erdogan's orders without delay, because Trump has extensive personal ties with Turkey ranging from 2 Trump Towers to co-ownerships of 117 different business ventures in Turkey, all of whose business successes rely on Trump's good personal relationship with Turkey and Erdogan. Our Kurd allies in Syria, who had helped us defeat ISIS, begged Trump not to withdraw United States troops from Syria for fear of a Turkish invasion, but Trump turned a deaf ear to them and ignored their cries and withdrew anyway, abandoning our allies to a deadly invasion by Turkey, all in the name of Trump's own self-interest. Next came Trump's payback to Putin for Russia's 2016 election interference intended to help Trump. Putin only wanted one payback from Trump, and that was for Trump to take the United States out of NATO in order to make NATO weak and powerless. That payback was the one gift Putin had always wanted, because without the United States, NATO would fall apart and be ineffective. Ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union, Putin's one goal had been to put Soviet Union back together again. And the one obstacle had been NATO, without which Putin would be able to invade his neighboring countries, unopposed and without fear of reprisal from the United States and its allies. Trump was the only willing American president that Putin could fool into assisting him in fulfilling his ambition of weakening NATO. And while he was president, Trump did everything he could to get the United States to withdraw from NATO. A recent report reveals that at least 20 foreign officials bribed Trump for favors while he was president in 2016. Trump will take a bribe from anyone if the price is right. It doesn't matter who it's from or where it's coming from. It can be from lobbyists, foreign governments, or even adversaries of this country. As long as they offer the cash, Trump will take it, no questions asked. And for all the big talk about showing strength and resolve to China, while Trump was president, he took a $5.5 million bribe from China to roll back sanctions against a Chinese-based phone company called ZTE who had conducted spying activity on the United States government and sold sensitive IP parts to America's enemies, North Korea and Iran. And in exchange for the lifting of this sanction, China not only bribed Trump with $5.5 million, but it also instantly granted Trump's daughter, Ivanka, 18 trademarks which he had been seeking from China for years but had been unable to get. Trump just can't help himself. He has to make money at every turn. He even made money off the Secret Service that the American taxpayers hired to protect him and his family by charging the American government thousands of dollars a night to house his Secret Service in his hotel rooms, shamefully profiting off the American taxpayer paying for his protection. Which brings us to 2024. Since Trump never suffered any blowback for taking millions of dollars in bribes while he was the president in 2016, in 2024, Trump openly asked for a billion-dollar bribe from fossil fuel companies to remove all of President Biden's environmental regulations, an act that got a complaint filed against Trump for criminal bribery. And today, Trump is more emboldened and more willing to do what it takes to win, including selling out our health and well-being and selling out our national security secrets, all in the name of his own self-interest and self-gain, and to increase his prospects of getting elected. And none of this should come as a surprise to anyone, coming from a man who has made a lifetime career out of defrauding people. This is how Trump has made his money his entire life. Fraud is all he knows, like opening up a fake university and defrauding thousands of people out of their hard-earned money and nest eggs. A business venture that got Trump sued in a class action by all the defrauded students, and which ended up with a settlement, forcing Trump to pay millions in damages to the defrauded students who fell victim to his fake university. In another instance, Trump was sued for a real estate fraud scheme wherein which he took funds from investors to build beachfront properties but abandoned the projects midway through and never returned the investors' money. Trump was also charged by the Department of Justice for scamming the public by running fraudulent charities under the pretense of raising money for a worthy cause. but instead using the charity proceeds for his own personal gain, such as purchasing a painting of himself and using the charity funds to pay for his own legal expenses, just to name a few. In this criminal charge for fraud, Trump was convicted of organizing fake charities, and he and his children were ordered to pay damages and penalties. But the fraud never stopped. Fraud is ingrained in all of Trump's actions and in the foundation of all of his ambitions. This is what Trump knows and does best. And as one of his last acts of betrayal to the country that he was elected to protect, Trump gave hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars in COVID relief funds to his family and friends and billionaire oil buddies, who pocketed the money without any reprisal. Funds that were earmarked to help needy small businesses survive the COVID pandemic were instead redirected by Trump to his family and friends and billionaire oil allies that didn't even need the money, but only took the money because it was there and the opportunity presented itself. And when these fund giveaways were flagged by loyal government employees to be fraudulent, Trump made sure that those red flags were erased before he left office in 2020, so that he and his family and friends would never be investigated for fraud. And this was full circle of Trump looting the country from beginning to end, in every way that he could while he was in office, to his very last day. The same way he is looting his supporters at every turn and as many times as he can and they will allow him.